Hello everyone, and welcome to Anime Dreams. I'm so excited to have you all here today. In this episode, we're diving into a fascinating what-if scenario. What if Naruko had her own ninja gadgets, just like Capsule Corp tech? This is part 3 of our deep dive into this unique crossover, and I'm sure it's going to be a wild ride. Disclaimer: the content on this channel is purely for entertainment and discussion purposes. I do not own any of the anime footage featured in my videos. All rights and credits go to their respective creators and copyright holders. Alright, let's jump right into it, guys. Enjoy the discussion. Lana and Kushina were racing towards Shinjin, their eyes widening in surprise when the ape jumped into the air, still holding Kakashi. Naruko, with a grin on her face, applied pressure to her fist, causing Kakashi to cry out in distress. As Naruko landed, she remarked, "Oh, look, a doggy." She casually tossed Kakashi over her shoulder, ignoring the thud of his body against a tree, and then asked, "Wanna play doggy?" Lana, hearing herself being called a dog twice, growled and responded, "You big, silly ape. I'm going to enjoy this." Shinjin smiled and dashed forward, aiming a punch at Lana, who barely managed to duck under it. Kushina, still perched on Lana's back, swiftly formed a hand sign and unleashed a powerful water jutsu, hitting Shinjin's arm. Lana seized the opportunity, latching onto the arm and making Shinjin cry out in pain. Shinjin attempted to shake Lana off, growling, "Bad dog." Lana, not backing down, opened her mouth, unleashing a beam of ki toward Shinjin. Sensing the attack, Lana quickly released her grip and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast that decimated part of the forest. Lana then tackled Shinjin, pushing her further away from the village. Kushina, still focused, completed a series of hand signs and called out, "Water style, water trumpet jutsu." Lana, howling in the distance, unleashed a bolt of lightning toward Shinjin. The blast landed, making Shinjin shriek in pain. Her fur scorched and singed, but the warrior didn't back down. Shinjin's expression twisted into one of pure fury. She suddenly enveloped herself in an ominous yellow aura, surprising both Kushina and Lana. Kushina, recognizing the energy, urgently said, "Lana, we need to retreat." Lana nodded and leapt backward just as Shinjin exploded with an overwhelming burst of energy, leaving a massive crater in her wake. The explosion barely missed Kakashi, who was left unconscious and severely injured against a tree. However, to their shock, Shinjin stood in the debris, completely healed. Shinjin, grinning maliciously, declared, "That wasn't the almighty explosion of the orb of hell. It was the divine absorption of the orb of heaven. It healed me of all my injuries and erased any soreness." Kushina cursed under her breath, realizing that if what Shinjin said was true, the battle had just begun again. Shinjin then taunted them, "You have 20 minutes left." Before they could react, Shinjin disappeared in a blur, and the next moment, Lana found herself flying over the treetops, with Kushina barely clinging to her. Shinjin reappeared, now cloaked in a silver energy shroud. Her eyes, glowing bright red, exuded pure power. Lana, confused, asked, "What just happened, Kushina?" Kushina climbed onto Lana's head and shrugged, "Not sure, but we need to be careful." Shinjin roared and released a colossal orange beam toward them. Thinking fast, Kushina slapped a seal onto Lana's muzzle and cried, "Uzumaki Fuin Jutsu, Shield of the Ancients." A massive blue barrier formed in front of them, blocking the attack but shaking the surrounding area. Shinjin, undeterred, unleashed the same attack 10 more times before vanishing again, just as the barrier collapsed. Kushina, breathing heavily, muttered, "She managed to drain the shield of the ancients." Lana, sensing that Kushina was growing tired, was about to say something when her instincts screamed at her to move. She jumped back just in time as Shinjin reappeared above her, unleashing a powerful combo of attacks that destroyed the surrounding air and trees. Shinjin landed with a roar and began pounding on her chest, creating an eerie silence. Lana, confused, tried to figure out Shinjin's intentions, while Kushina, spotting Kakashi on the ground, created a clone to send him safely to the summon realm in a scroll until the battle was over. As Lana looked on, she realized Shinjin was changing again, shrinking by several feet. Kushina, she's forcing herself back into her human form. Kushina blinked and stared at Shinjin, who continued to shrink. In a few moments, she had returned to a nearly human size. However, the transformation was far from over. With a fierce cry, Shinjin shed the remaining fur, revealing pale, flawless skin. Her silver horns poked out from her forehead, and her eyes glowed with a strange, unsettling mixture of silver and gold. Her once human hands were now skeletal bones, shrouded in an aura of darkness. Her wings, now skeletal and glowing with a supernatural light, seemed to drain the very life force around them. Shinjin, now fully transformed, looked down at Kushina and Lana with a laugh that sent a chill down their spines. Kushina, sword ready, asked, "What did you do?" Shinjin's voice was laced with confidence as she responded, "You have 10 minutes left, Kushina. For these last moments, I will tap into the power of the death force. Every living being holds a small amount of this force within them, and I possess an extraordinary amount due to my connection to the goddess of death." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "Don't worry, Kushina. I'm still only using 10% of my full power." Kushina, focused and determined, asked, "Why would you hold back?" Shinjin grinned, her eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "Because I want to see just how far you two can go before time runs out." Shinjin laughed again and said, "Simple Uzumaki-san. If I were to use 15% of my full power with this flowing through me, I'd defeat you within 5 seconds, and those 3 companions you foolishly tethered to your lifeline would become part of my force. At 10%, I should be able to defeat you without causing any harm." Kushina, hearing this, was about to say something when Lana interjected, "She's right, Kushina. The death force is the very energy that allows Shinigami-sama to extract a soul from a body without needing to engage in battle. It's also the energy Kami-sama places within every living being to allow them to be judged when they pass on." Kushina's eyes widened upon hearing this. She sighed and said, "Thanks, Lana. You can go back now?" Lana nodded and replied, "Be careful, Kushina." Then, with a poof of smoke, Lana vanished. Once Lana was gone, Kushina lowered her sword and entered her clan's taijutsu stance, the swirling fist. Shinjin, noticing this, adopted her own fighting stance, more specifically the first of the 13 disciplines of death. Shinjin infused the death force through her body and said, "Be happy, as this is the first discipline of death. It's the easiest of the 13 and was taught to me by my cousin Rachel. It's called Shinzo Kekken no, cardiovascular, and as you can imagine, it's very taxing on both the victim and the user's cardiovascular systems." Kushina, hearing this, said, "Well, it sounds like I need to avoid being hit, and then I'll have you at a disadvantage." Shinjin chuckled and said, "Yes, be optimistic, Uzumaki, and maybe you won't get hurt too badly." Shinjin then blurred toward Kushina, who barely managed to dodge to the left. Kushina countered with a punch of her own, but Shinjin not only deflected it but also kicked Kushina in the calf, forcing her to the ground. Kushina rolled and attempted to sweep Shinjin's legs out from under her. Shinjin jumped over the attempt, turned, and landed a kick directly in the center of Kushina's chest. Kushina slid back from the force but quickly regained her footing and threw several kunai and shuriken. Shinjin saw this and executed 2 backflips, narrowly avoiding the sharp projectiles. Taking advantage of the situation, Kushina rushed forward while Shinjin was mid-flip and landed a powerful kick to Shinjin's stomach, sending her to the ground. Shinjin smiled and, using her tail as a spring, grabbed both of Kushina's legs and flipped her upside down. Kushina was then struck twice in the chest before Shinjin flipped over her and tossed Kushina toward a tree. Kushina replaced herself with a log and rubbed her chest, feeling the impact of the kicks. Shinjin, with a playful smirk, said, "You are quite resilient, Kushina." Kushina, now focusing more, formed hand signs and declared, "Water style, water cannon jutsu." Shinjin, sensing the oncoming attack, quickly performed her own hand signs and, to Kushina's surprise, shouted, "Hyotan, Jack Frost's breath jutsu." The water from Kushina's water cannon jutsu instantly froze, and the temperature dropped drastically. Kushina, shaking off her surprise, charged at Shinjin and attempted to punch her. Shinjin, elegantly dodging the attack, kneed Kushina in the stomach, making her fall to her knees and struggle to breathe. Shinjin, capitalizing on the opportunity, kicked Kushina in the chest again, forcing her to grasp her chest in pain. Shinjin continued with a series of rapid kicks to Kushina's hands and chest, each landing with force. Kushina cried out with each strike, but Shinjin's smile only grew wider. Eventually, Shinjin paused and turned to face Kushina, who was struggling to stand. Kushina, despite the pain, looked up at Shinjin with determination, refusing to be defeated. Shinjin smiled softly and said, "You are very impressive, Kushina Uzumaki, and you have earned respect from both sides of me. In fact, you've impressed them so much that they've decided to show the utmost respect an elite warrior can give to another." Kushina, still catching her breath, asked, "What is that?" Shinjin smiled warmly and said, "A noble defeat." With that, Shinjin's smile became serene, and she continued, "Therefore, I will defeat you with a special move that will make this victory all the more honorable." Shinjin vanished in an instant, and for a moment, everything went pitch black. The sound of impact could be heard, followed by several gasps. When the darkness lifted, Kushina was lying on the ground, still dazed, with a peaceful expression on her face. Her clothes were slightly disheveled, but there was no sign of harm. Shinjin stood a few feet away, her expression calm and respectful. "You fought well, Kushina." Kushina, blinking and slowly coming to, saw Naruto sitting next to Ashley, eating a bowl of ramen, while Ashley was munching on something. Kushina slowly sat up and blushed when she realized her state. She quickly covered herself, feeling embarrassed. Naruto noticed she was awake and greeted her, "Welcome back to the land of the conscious." Kushina, still rubbing her head, asked, "How long was I out?" Ashley, taking a break from her rabbit, said, 2 hours. Kushina's eyes widened in surprise upon hearing this. She quickly stood up, wobbling slightly, and summoned Riku, who handed her both scrolls before disappearing. She unrolled them, summoning all 3 people she had sealed. Upon seeing Kakashi's condition, she winced, while Ashley snickered. Naruko, rolling her eyes, knew what Ashley's snicker meant. She snapped her fingers, and Kushina gasped as all 3 individuals were fully healed and Kakashi regained consciousness. Turning to Naruko with wide eyes, she asked, "How did you?" Ashley replied, "We both have the sister power of death force flowing through us, and she has learned how to heal people using this power. That's how." Kakashi, now standing, asked, "Did we pass the test? Did Kushina-sensei defeat Shinjin?" Naruko sighed and said, "Yes, you passed the test, but only because Kushina-san earned our respect. No, she didn't defeat Shinjin, and you're still an idiot, sensei." Kakashi's eyebrow twitched at the remark. Kushina, ignoring this, woke up Sasuke and Sakura. As soon as Sasuke was awake, he glared at Naruko and said, "Dobi, I demand you give me your power. Only an elite like me deserves power like that." Ashley rolled her eyes along with Naruko and said, "Shut up, you arrogant wannabe. Kami, hearing you complain so much makes me wish you had been left behind when your clan was destroyed." Everyone, except for Naruko, stared in shock. Sasuke trembled with anger. Naruko sighed and said, "That was uncalled for, Ashley. If the fool wants to live in the past and hold on to his hatred for his brother, who is an Anbu at 13, let him. I really don't care, as long as he doesn't get in my way." Furious, Sasuke charged at Naruko and Ashley. However, both of them swiftly responded by slapping him with their tails, sending him crashing into a tree. A loud crack echoed through the air as Sasuke collided with the tree and fell unconscious once again. Sakura, having completely forgotten the earlier incident with the 2 powerful warriors, screamed and attempted to strike Naruko. Like Sasuke, she was slapped away by a tail, landing in a heap on top of Sasuke. Naruko snorted and muttered, "Idiots, both of them." Ashley nodded in agreement and said, No arguments here. Kushina and Kakashi both had huge sweat drops on the back of their heads, puzzled by Sasuke and Sakura's strange behavior. The following day, Naruko was seen calmly sitting in mid-air while Sasuke and Sakura were busy painting a weathered metal fence. This was their third mission of the day, and it was nothing more than a mundane task that Naruko flatly refused to do. Ashley, too, had declined to participate and was off on her own mission. Kakashi had tried to persuade Naruko to join in on the chore, but Naruko had reminded him that he had not earned the right to give her orders, and she wasn't required to listen to him. Kakashi, muttering under his breath, returned to reading his book. Kushina didn't say anything to Naruko, as she honestly agreed with her. This was simply a pointless task that the civilians were too lazy to handle themselves, so they hired Shinon to do it. Sakura, wiping sweat from her forehead, glared up at Naruko and shouted, "Naruko, come down here and help us paint." Naruko, however, remained unbothered, her attention focused on Ashley, who was stealthily tailing a prominent member of the civilian council. The man hadn't noticed Ashley's presence, nor the potential danger he was in. Naruko had been the one to give Ashley this assignment after learning that this particular council member and his brothers had been exploiting their position of power to harm innocent children. This particular man had been targeting young girls, and Naruko's sense of justice was deeply offended by his actions. Sakura, noticing that Naruko was ignoring her, grew frustrated and yelled again, "Naruko, come down here and help us paint this old, ugly fence right now." Naruko was still ignoring Sakura and quietly counted the seconds until Ashley pounced on the man, quickly neutralizing him. Sakura, now feeling furious, grabbed a paint can and threw it toward Naruko, thinking it would hit her. Naruko swiftly dodged to the left, causing the paint can to miss her and instead strike Ino, covering the blonde girl in white paint. Ino, now coated in the paint, was infuriated. With fire in her eyes, she rushed toward the source of the can's throw. Shikamaru and Kuji quickly followed her, and Asuma sighed as he joined his students. Ino spotted Sakura and Sasuke standing near a half-painted fence, and clenched her fists. Sakura, holding another paint can, was about to throw it into the air. In a blur, Ino grabbed the can, flipped it upside down, and poured the paint all over Sakura, who screamed in surprise. This drew the attention of Sasuke, Kakashi, and Kushina. Sakura, now covered in white paint, glared at Ino and shouted, "Why did you do that for, Ino?" Ino, returning the glare, replied, "Because you got white paint all over me and almost ruined the puppies my team was hired to clean." Sakura, now fuming, screeched, "So you poured paint all over me just because you didn't want some silly little dogs to get dirty?" Ino, no longer holding back, responded, "Yes, Sakura. My team was hired to wash the puppies, and I'll be darned if I let you, with your reckless actions, ruin my mission." Naruko, now interested, had been watching the scene unfold, and was listening closely. Shaking with anger, Sakura wound up and swung her fist toward Ino, but Ino, with a confident smile, kicked Sakura in the stomach, forcing her to bend over. Ino then swiftly elbowed Sakura in the head, sending her to the ground. Grabbing Sakura's long hair, Ino yanked her to her knees and said, "You're a fool, Sakura. I take my training seriously, unlike you and those other girls." Sakura glared up at Ino, about to speak, when the sound of clapping interrupted. All eyes turned toward Naruko, who was clapping with a smile on her face. "Well done, Yamanaka," Naruko said, her tone filled with approval. "Not only did you put the pink-haired weakling in her place, but you also proved my point that she's failing as a kunoichi." Naruko then sat down on the ground and looked at the fence. Everyone's eyes widened when they saw that the entire fence was now completely covered in white paint. Naruko turned to Ino and stared at her in the same way she had stared at the fence. Then, everyone was even more surprised when Ino appeared to be completely clean of the white paint, as if she had just taken a shower. Naruko nodded and then turned to Kakashi and Kushina, both of whom were wide-eyed. Rolling her eyes, Naruko asked, "Are we done here, Kushina?" Kakashi, flustered, began to stutter, while Kushina simply shook her head and replied, "I guess we are." Naruko nodded. Good, because I'd like to have a word with Yamanaka, if that's alright with her. Ino blinked before releasing her grip on Sakura and responded, that's fine with me, as long as Asuma-sensei doesn't mind. Naruko snorted, then looked at Asuma with a glint of curiosity in her eyes. Is that alright with you, Asuma-sensei? Asuma gulped audibly and said, yes, that's fine. I was planning to dismiss you three after this mission anyway. Naruko, satisfied with that answer, turned to Ino and said, now that that's settled, come with me, Ino. The matter I wish to discuss with you is better suited for the privacy of my home. Ino nodded and smiled. You can just call me Ino. Yamanaka is just my clan name. Naruko chuckled and said, Ino, it is, then. The next week, Naruko was sitting comfortably on a tree branch, gently petting a sweet brown and white cat, while ignoring her two teammates who were chasing after an illusion. It was honestly quite amusing, as they had been assigned the mission to capture Tora, but Naruko had easily tracked the cat down and scooped her up. The cat immediately began to purr in her arms, purring even louder when Naruko started to pet her. Ashley, who had also joined the group, looked at Tora with a hint of jealousy. She had once been the one to receive such attention from Naruko, but now Naruko barely petted her. Though, to be fair, Naruko had been feeding Tora plenty of food and even allowed her to hunt, which was probably a better form of affection than petting. After capturing Tora, Naruko had used the power of Excalibur to cast a powerful illusion on her teammates, watching as they chased after an imaginary cat for over 2 hours. At first, she had found it hilarious, but now, she couldn't help but feel a little sorry for them. With a sigh, she released the illusion, and watched as Sasuke and Sakura shook off the remnants of the spell. Sakura, scanning the area, asked, where did that silly cat go? Naruko rolled her eyes and coughed, alerting her companions to her position. They both blinked, spotting her holding a sleeping Tora. Naruko stood up and said, you two are truly hopeless and will likely always be this way. She turned around and began to fly towards the mission tower, with her companions struggling to keep up, of course, Sakura shouting complaints along the way. When they finally arrived at the mission tower, Naruko landed gracefully. She set the still sleeping Tora onto Ashley's back and walked inside, knowing Ashley was right behind her. The group made their way up the stairs to the mission tower. Naruko opened the door and rolled her eyes as she saw Kakashi standing in the corner, absorbed in his reading, while Kushina glared at him disapprovingly. Sarutobi sat at his desk, and Iruka looked like he had a headache. Naruko spotted Tora's owner and gently handed the cat to the woman. However, as soon as the woman began to squeeze Tora too tightly, Naruko swiftly snatched the cat back. Sending a sharp glare in the woman's direction, she said, that's not how you show a cat affection. Placing Tora back on Ashley's back, Naruko added, until you learn how to properly care for an animal, I will be keeping Tora-chan. The woman, clearly taken aback, said, you can't do that. I am the wife of the Fire Lord, and... Naruko cut her off, her voice firm. I don't care who you are. Until you learn how to care for Tora properly, she stays with me. If your husband has an issue with that, he can speak to me directly. The woman, hearing Naruko's last name, paled. To everyone's surprise, she dropped to her knees and bowed deeply. Lord Shinjin, please forgive my actions. I did not mean to question your judgment. Naruko raised an eyebrow. Why the sudden change of attitude? The woman swallowed nervously and replied, Lady Akira Shinjin is the rightful ruler of all of the Fire Country, and she informed us that you are her child. Naruko's eyes widened as she processed this. She ordered you to treat me with the utmost respect, or else there would be consequences, didn't she? The woman nodded meekly. Naruko sighed. Akira is a very demanding person. She makes it harder for me to earn respect for my own achievements. Turning back to the woman, Naruko said, I'll make it simple. You have 1 month to prove you can take proper care of Tora. If, by the end of the month, you've shown you can, she will be returned to you. If not, she stays with me. The woman nodded in understanding. I will do my best, Lord Shinjin. She and her guards left the room. Naruko turned to Tora, who was purring joyfully, and said, "Don't get too excited, Tora. While you're in my care, you'll be training with Ashley and me. We'll help you become even stronger." Ashley, with a mischievous grin, chuckled as everyone noticed the playful yet somewhat intense aura around her. Hiruzen cleared his throat and said, "All right, Team 7, let's focus on your next mission." Heading toward the D-rank mission board, Hiruzen was interrupted when Sasuke said, "I demand a more challenging mission, so I can unlock my Sharingan and finally prove my strength." Sakura, ever the loyal supporter, nodded. "Yes, give Sasuke-kun a more difficult mission so he can defeat Naruko." Kakashi sighed, wondering what was going on with them. Kushina, shaking her head, understood exactly what was happening. Naruko had been warning them all along. Iruka sighed as well, launching into a long explanation about the nature of D-rank missions. He blinked in surprise when he saw Naruko and Ashley in a friendly poker game, Sasuke sulking, Sakura chatting endlessly with Sasuke, Kakashi reading his book, Kushina polishing her sword, and Sarutobi reading his own book. Iruka, his patience running thin, finally asked, "Is anyone even listening to me?" Ashley pushed all of her chips forward and asked, "Did you say something?" Iruka, now visibly frustrated, could relate to how Guy must feel when Kakashi did the same thing to him. Kushina, looking at Sarutobi, suggested, "We should assign them a C-rank mission. It's not like they can't handle it. With Kakashi and me along, it should be fine." Hiruzen, closing his book, agreed and reached for the C-rank mission scroll. After reading it, he said, "Your mission is to travel to the country of Wave and escort Tazuna, the bridge builder, safely home." At that moment, Tazuna walked in, looking over his assigned protection with a dubious expression. "Is this really what I paid for? I expected a team of capable ninja, not a confused pink-haired girl, a brooding boy, and a one-eyed sensei." Naruko laughed, "Two of the three you just insulted are still learning, and the last one is, well, let's just say a little absent-minded." Tazuna turned to Naruko, his eyes widening in realization, and quickly bowed. "Lord Shinjin." Naruko and everyone else blinked upon hearing this. Naruko quickly asked, "How do you know who I am?" Tazuna, still bowing respectfully, said, "Lady Michelle visited my country nearly a year ago after a devastating personal tragedy struck my family. My daughter was on the brink of despair when Lady Michelle comforted her, telling her to be patient, as her dear little cousin would soon arrive in our country, and Wave would witness her rise to becoming a Super Saiyan." Naruko, hearing this, blinked in surprise and said, "Well, since Michelle has the ability to see the future, I guess I'll be reaching Super Saiyan status soon." Ashley, with a smirk on her face, said, "That's great. Soon, our fusions will have a whole new level of power." Naruko nodded, about to say something, when a scroll suddenly appeared out of nowhere and dropped directly into her hands. She blinked, looked at the scroll, and her eyes widened when she recognized the handwriting of her aunt. Opening the scroll, she read its contents and then handed it to Ashley to read as well. Once Ashley finished reading the scroll, she burned it and started to laugh loudly. After a moment, she stopped and asked, "Oi, Kushina-sensei, how do you feel about receiving a mission from Kami herself to end the bloodline purges in Kirigakure?" Kushina and everyone in the room stared in shock, and Kushina asked, "Is that what was in the scroll?" Naruko snorted and said, "Technically, it was a directive to remove Yagura, the fourth Mizukage, and all those loyal to him. But it can also be seen as putting an end to the senseless bloodshed that has plagued Kirigakure." Kushina, hearing this, replied, "I would be honored." Ashley smiled and said, "Good, because the reward for you is a legendary sword, just like the one father has." Kushina blinked and asked, "Which sword?" Naruko closed her eyes and looked out the window, saying, "Sunga, the lost sword of the great dog demon." Everyone in the room gasped in surprise, as that sword had been sought after by many due to its immense power. Kushina, with a dry mouth, asked, "How?" Ashley giggled and said, "Kami has had it all this time." Naruko, ignoring the shock, said, "Enough talking. Go pack, everyone. My Saiyan blood is boiling." Everyone nodded quickly and left to pack. None of them noticed a shadow disappearing behind a portrait. The next morning, Naruko, with Ashley in her human form, stood at the gate with a bored expression on her face. Ashley was casually eating a piece of meat, a simple yet hearty breakfast. Both of them were dressed in classic, yet modified, Saiyan armor. Naruko didn't have shoulder pads, while Ashley sported a single shoulder pad that had clearly seen some wear. Naruko had Excalibur attached to her right hip, and her Saiyan tail was coiled around her waist. Ashley carried a golden pair of daggers on each side of her hip, and her Saiyan tail gently swayed behind her. They had arrived early, as Naruko's Saiyan nature wouldn't let her sleep past the time she was needed. The energy for a good challenge was always at the forefront of her thoughts. Ashley's Saiyan blood was similarly stirred, as she had dealt with some unfinished business before coming here, while Naruko had mostly observed with mild disinterest. She had chosen not to intervene when some had begged her to stop Ashley's actions. Now, the two of them were waiting for the rest of their team to arrive. Naruko had made sure to leave Tora in good hands at home, entrusting her 3 little Saiyan trainees and Ino to look after the cat. She had even given them access to the training chamber. Naruko couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of them in there. The only one who had truly adjusted to the chamber's intense environment was little Konohamaru. The boy had a fierce spirit and was determined to follow in Naruko's footsteps, accepting every challenge without hesitation. When Naruko had first met him, she had brushed him off, calling him low class. But Konohamaru had refused to back down, challenging her to a fight every day since then. Over time, Naruko had come to respect the boy's tenacity. However, one day, when Konohamaru's instructor, Ebisu, tried to reprimand him for bothering Naruko, she stepped in swiftly. She had told Ebisu that Konohamaru wasn't bothering her, but rather was beginning the journey to becoming an elite Saiyan. Ebisu had tried to convince her otherwise, but Naruko's response was swift and decisive, leaving the man with a bruised face. There were whispers around the village about the incident, particularly regarding Ebisu's slightly swollen mouth and the rumors that his pride had taken a bit of a hit. Later, Konohamaru had asked Naruko if she had been serious about training him. Naruko smirked and replied, "Welcome, future Saiyan warrior, to the first day of your new life." Since then, she had been training the young boy relentlessly and unlocked his ki. She had actually laughed heartily when she taught Konohamaru how to fly, as the boy kept crashing into trees. The other 2 youngsters entered the scene one day after Konohamaru confided in her that he needed help. Naruko had agreed and followed Konohamaru to a training ground, where a few troublemakers had been picking on a group of kids. Konohamaru had told the troublemakers to stop, or there would be consequences. The troublemakers attempted to retaliate, but Naruko intervened. She handled the situation swiftly and effectively, leaving the troublemakers in a state of bewilderment. The 2 other kids then thanked her and begged to be trained. Upon observing them, Naruko could instantly see the potential they had and agreed to teach them. All 3 children could now easily take down a Chunin using only their ki. Konohamaru could likely hold his own against a Jonin for a few minutes before being overpowered. After watching Ino teach her teammate a valuable lesson, Naruko decided to train the girl in Ansatsuken, noticing the weaknesses in her previous fighting style. She also unlocked the girl's ki and started guiding her on awakening her mana. Naruko was certain that Ino would become formidable with mana and couldn't wait to see the girl create attacks using it. While Naruko herself was a powerhouse with mana, she preferred using her ki, chakra, the force, and death force. Karma, mana, biotics, chi, reshi, and life force were more focused on healing, but Naruko wasn't particularly interested in healing, as her Saiyan Zenkai made her stronger with each defeat, more specifically, with each near-death experience. She did have an incredibly strong healing factor, with Ashley being a close second, and the Uzumaki clan following closely. The only beings who surpassed her in healing were her mother, aunt, and cousins, who were immortal and didn't age or die. Naruko, however, could still die and was aging like any other mortal. Shaking her head, Naruko noticed the young girl with pink hair arriving. She and Ashley both rolled their eyes at the large bag the girl was carrying, knowing that most of what she packed was unnecessary for the mission. Naruko glanced at Ashley, silently asking if she cared, to which Ashley nonchalantly replied that she didn't. With a chuckle, Naruko returned to her thoughts. 5 minutes later, the brooding boy arrived, looking surprisingly ready for the mission. Naruko and Ashley exchanged a nod, recognizing that he was not as foolish as they initially thought. Naruko turned her attention to the left, where Kushina arrived, looking as though she was preparing for a war. After inspecting her armor, Naruko could tell it was good but would not last long under pressure. Shaking her head, Naruko spoke, "Ashley, give her armor set 4, and reduce the gravity and weight seals by 10. Ashley nodded, rolled up her sleeve to reveal a seal, and applied chakra to unseal a copy of Bardock's armor, only this time, it bore the royal insignia of the Shinjin clan on the chest plate. Ashley walked over to Kushina, handed her the armor, and said, "Consider yourself an honorary member of the Saiyan race and the Shinjin clan. This armor can withstand a full-powered galaxy breaker from my father and only crack. It should provide you with perfect protection." Kushina blinked in awe, accepting the armor and asking, "How powerful is this galaxy breaker?" Ashley, noticing Kakashi's arrival with Tazuna, smirked, knowing many people were listening, and replied, "A full-powered galaxy breaker from my father is equivalent to 10,000 tailed beast balls. It has the power to shatter this world and universe 15 times over." She couldn't help but laugh as eyes widened, jaws dropped, and several people stood in shock. Naruko, shaking her head, said, "Stop gawking, idiot sensei," and set the girl straight. Kakashi, with his eyebrows twitching, walked over to the now annoyed Sakura and began to set her straight. Kushina, moving behind a tree to change, slipped into the new armor and asked, "Do you really think this armor is necessary?" Naruko stared at the horizon with a confident smile on her face and said, "Yes, just as my dear cousin predicted, my ascension into Super Saiyan status is happening, which means that whatever challenge we face on this mission will push me beyond my current limitations." Ashley nodded and said, "My tail is also twitching, and it hasn't done that since my real parents were taken by those hunters. Something big and dangerous is going to happen." Kushina, hearing this, was curious and asked, "What exactly is this Super Saiyan status?" Ashley smiled and replied, "It's a sign that a Saiyan is destined for greatness, or at the very least, one of the most powerful." Naruko closed her eyes and said, "Enough talking. Since everyone is ready, let's move out." She stepped forward, and Ashley, now focused, fell into step beside her. Kakashi, with his eyebrows twitching, said, "Sasuke, Sakura, fall in line and guard Tazuna." Sasuke scowled and moved to guard Tazuna, with a furious Sakura following suit. Kushina sighed, looking down at her armor, and said, "Here we go, Team 7's first C-rank mission." She then walked out of the gate, following Kakashi. A day later, Naruko and Ashley found themselves staring at a puddle down the road with deadpan expressions. Ashley turned to Kushina and asked, "Are they serious?" Kushina and Kakashi both sweated nervously and asked, "What do you mean?" Naruko rolled her eyes and said, "Don't play dumb with us, Kushina. We both know you noticed those two fools, no, those two clumsy idiots hiding in that weak and pointless genjutsu down the road." Kakashi blinked and asked, "Why did you say don't play dumb with us to Kushina, but not to me?" Ashley snorted and said, "You're not playing, you really are that clueless, idiot sensei." Kakashi's eyebrows twitched, and he looked dangerously close to retaliating, but Naruko ignored him and said, "We were trying to figure out who they were after." Naruko added, "It's pretty obvious who they're after." Ashley nodded and said, "They're after Tazuna, who clearly lied about the mission details and rank. My guess is that his country or village is under the control of some tyrant, someone who either staged a public execution or hired goons to control everything." Naruko noticed Tazuna's subtle flinch and said, "It was the execution that caused him to flinch. Most likely someone close to him, like a son or son-in-law." Ashley, noticing Tazuna's double flinch, said, "Son-in-law, and if my intuition is right, there was another execution, And it involved someone very close to Tazana, perhaps a grandchild. That would make sense since he mentioned that Michelle Wani stopped his daughter from taking her own life after a personal tragedy. Tazana now had tears in his eyes. Naruko narrowed her eyes at him, then shook her head and said, "Watch this. Behold the power of one of the only mortal Shinjin and the prince of all scions." Ashley, smirking, aimed her hand at the puddle and said, "Make that both mortal Shinjin, and both the prince and princess of all scions." Both of them gathered immense ki in their hands, and together they shouted, "Dark Radiance Plasma Wave." A massive explosion erupted as two gigantic beams of the darkest black shot from their hands, crashing into the puddle. A huge explosion filled the air, and when the smoke cleared, Tazana took several steps back. Kakashi broke into a cold sweat, Sasuke shook with jealousy, Sakura turned pale, and Kushina looked as if she'd seen something unbelievable. There was a gaping hole where the puddle had been, and electricity sparked inside the hole. Naruko lowered her hand, shook her head, and said, "Still needs work." Ashley pouted and lowered her hand, saying, "I thought we had it right that time." Naruko turned to Tazana and said, "That, Tazana, is the power of the scions. And that move isn't even perfected yet." Everyone was stunned, and they all thought, "That move isn't perfect? Kami, I can't imagine what it would be like when it is." Sasuke clenched his fists and thought, "Why do Naruko and her stupid companion have so much power? I should have that power, not her. I'm the elite." Ashley snapped her fingers and healed the hole instantly, making everyone gape in astonishment. Naruko snorted and said, "Life force and mana. Now stop staring and let's move on." Naruko then once again moved forward with Ashley skipping beside her. Tazana, quickly recovering from his shock, followed the two warriors, a sense of hope filling his body as he observed the immense power they displayed. Kushina, shaking her head in disbelief, followed the group, feeling relieved that Naruko, Ashley, and their ally Shinjin had only been using a fraction of their true strength. If their previous attack was any indication, there was still much more to come. Kakashi, still sweating, ushered the still shocked Sakura and the frustrated Sasuke forward, all while planning how he could earn Naruko and Ashley's respect. 2 days later, Team 7 sat in a boat, slowly paddling across a large body of water surrounded by dense mist. Naruko had her eyes closed, but her tail swayed with excitement behind her. Her Saiyan instincts were stirring, anticipating a challenge ahead that would truly test her abilities. Ashley, sitting beside Naruko, was licking her lips and clenching her fists, her own Saiyan blood ready for what was to come. Both could sense the powerful battle approaching. Kushina, observing the two scions, could tell that they were eagerly anticipating something. She had a gut feeling that she was about to witness more of their incredible strength. Kakashi, now reading a book, had come to terms with his role as Idiot Sensei, a title he wore proudly, knowing well that challenging Naruko or Ashley would be foolish, and he valued his life. Sakura, on the other hand, was feeling increasingly intimidated by Naruko and Ashley. She realized how much stronger they were than her and felt deeply out of place. Sasuke, still burning with jealousy, was eager to demand the same power Naruko and Ashley possessed. Tazana, however, was uncertain how Gato would deal with the two powerful figures, wondering if the land of Wave would indeed witness a transformation. The boat continued toward the shore, and Naruko opened her eyes as they arrived. Standing up, she said, "It's nearly time, Ashley." Ashley, standing up with a gleam in her eyes, replied, "I can't wait, father." Naruko turned to Kakashi and Kushina, looking them both directly in the eyes. "A powerful opponent or opponents are nearby, my Saiyan blood can feel it. They are ours, and if either of you tries to interfere." Ashley, her eyes glowing, added, "We will make sure you are removed from this reality. We won't just defeat you, but erase your presence entirely, so that every version of you across all worlds will cease to exist." Naruko focused on Kushina and said, "Whether you're an honorary Saiyan or not, you will be removed from this existence." She then turned and started walking, with Ashley following. Kushina and Kakashi, still processing the gravity of the situation, followed them silently. Kakashi, swallowing hard, said, "Understood." Kushina sighed deeply and muttered, "As you wish." The rest of Team 7 followed the two powerful figures into the mist. Moments later, Naruko blasted a bush with precision. Ashley, looking at the bush, commented, "Two rabbits. Their fur is white, which means they were likely kept in a controlled environment." Naruko smirked. Someone used the replacement jutsu. Both of them heard the air slicing and footsteps, and smirked in response. Ashley raised her hand and caught the handle of a large sword, one that both Kushina and Kakashi instantly recognized. Naruko, on the other hand, shifted Excalibur's sheath to block a powerful swing from another weapon the two also knew well. Naruko turned to find herself face to face with Kisame Hoshigaki, the feared rogue ninja of the hidden mist. Ashley, smirking, locked eyes with Zabuza Momochi, the infamous demon of the mist. Kisame smirked, impressed. "Well, looks like this one has some decent reflexes." Zabuza scoffed. "Girl, give me back my sword, and I won't hurt you." Ashley's eyes gleamed with excitement as she let out a wild laugh. Naruko, with a grin of determination, said, "Let's give it everything we've got." Ashley, upon hearing her speak, couldn't help but burst into laughter even more, if that was even possible. Suddenly, a powerful surge of energy erupted, blowing the thick mist away. The surges came from Ashley and Naruko. Naruko, still smiling, released a pure, focused ki that caused the sword in Kisame's hands to vibrate as if it were both in pain and joy. Ashley, still laughing, gripped the Kubikirabocho tightly, maintaining her hold with determination. Kisame, hearing the same odd strange reaction, tried to pull it free, his eyes widening when it didn't even budge. Meanwhile, Zabuza watched in concern as cracks began to form on his own sword, a sense of worry starting to grow within him. Naruko, now surrounded by a massive aura of black ki, spoke proudly, "Behold the might of the Prince of all Scions." Naruko flexed her muscles, and Kisame was sent flying backwards, crashing through several trees. Ashley, with a mischievous smirk on her face, taunted, "You want your sword, huh? Here, catch it." To Zabuza's shock and horror, she tossed his sword with such force that it could have taken down an elephant. Zabuza quickly replaced himself with a log, but to his dismay, not only was the log obliterated, but the spot it had occupied turned into a massive crater. That's when he noticed that his sword had somehow returned to Ashley's hands. Ashley laughed, her voice filled with amusement. "Try dodging this, you little worm. Let's make this fun," she said. With that, she shot toward him, leaving Zabuza wondering what he had gotten himself into. Naruko observed as Ashley engaged Zabuza in battle, a proud smile forming on her face. Turning her head in the direction Kisame had been sent flying, she remarked, "This is exactly what I was waiting for." With a mighty roar, Naruko blasted toward Kisame. Kakashi, standing in complete shock, muttered, "In the name of everything sacred, those two are monsters." Kushina, trembling with fear, could sense the malice, contempt, and raw power radiating from both of them. Sakura, overwhelmed with fear, realized that she was on a team full of two powerful warriors who could potentially harm her just for the slightest mistake. Sasuke, filled with envy, couldn't help but feel that the strength Ashley and Naruko were demonstrating should have been his, as he considered himself an elite needing power to defeat his brother, Itachi. Meanwhile, Tazuna, overwhelmed with relief, cried tears of joy, knowing that the two powerhouses had arrived to save his country from Gado's tyranny. Zabuza, retreating to gain some distance, observed as Ashley landed, her presence shaking the very earth beneath her. Pushing his fear aside, he drew a scroll and unsealed his backup sword, knowing Ashley still had a firm grip on his original weapon, Kubikirabocho. Ashley, spotting the backup sword, snorted in disdain. "You're not a real swordsman," she said. Zabuza, narrowing his eyes, asked, "What makes you say that?" With Kubikirabocho resting on her shoulder, Ashley replied confidently, "A true swordsman never lets his sword fall into the opponent's hands, nor does he rely on a backup sword." Zabuza scoffed, responding, "Who told you that nonsense?" Ashley, narrowing her eyes in response, said firmly, "My father. He taught me everything when he mastered his sword." Zabuza sneered. "Like I said, it's nonsense. Your father wasn't a true swordsman." Unbeknownst to him, Zabuza had just made a grave mistake. Ashley's temper flared as her power surged, and the sky darkened around her. Her aura intensified, her eyes burning with righteous fury. "Don't you dare insult my father ever again, you filthy Ningen!" she roared. Zabuza gulped nervously, wondering if his words had crossed a line he couldn't undo. Instinctively, he raised his backup sword to defend himself, but the earth beneath him cracked when Ashley slammed her glowing Kubikirabocho into the ground. He widened his eyes as he heard his sword crack under the force of her blow. The sight of Ashley's rage-filled eyes sent a chill down his spine, and he realized just how much power she was concealing. With a growl, Ashley disappeared in a flash, and Zabuza barely managed to leap over a crescent-shaped energy slash from Kubikirabocho. He landed and rolled to dodge another powerful swing from Ashley, only to gulp again as the ground split beneath him. He swung his backup sword in retaliation, but his sword cracked once more, unable to harm Ashley, whose skin remained unscathed. Ashley swung her Kubikirabocho again, and Zabuza, ducking and leaping back, found himself standing on the edge of a river. In desperation, he began performing hand signs. Water style, water dragon jutsu. Ashley, spotting the massive water dragon heading her way, lifted her left hand and declared, "Impending nightmare." Zabuza's eyes widened as a purple ball of energy shot from Naruko's hand, colliding with his dragon and causing it to disintegrate. He rushed forward, attempting to strike Naruko, but was swiftly slapped by Ashley's tail. He crashed into a tree, staggering as he struggled to regain his balance. He stood up, quickly performing hand signs, and muttered, "Hidden mist jutsu." A thick mist rolled in, obscuring everything, and Ashley snarled, realizing her target had disappeared. Clenching her fists, she was about to roar in frustration when Naruko's calm voice rang out. "Ashley Nicole Shinjin. Calm down." At the sound of her full name, Ashley's eyes widened in surprise. Her father only used her full name when she had crossed a line. Taking a deep breath, she shook off the anger that had been building up inside her. With a calmer demeanor, she glared at the mist and remarked, "Well played, Momochi. You intentionally upset me to create the mist again." With a confident smirk, Naruko said, "No matter what, this mist will fall along with you." Zabuza, hidden in the mist, wondered what she was talking about until he suddenly felt an immense surge of power. His eyes widened when he noticed the mist beginning to be drawn in by a vacuum-like force. As the mist started to clear, Zabuza could see a glowing presence within it. The mist parted completely, and Zabuza stepped back in surprise. Naruko was standing in the center of a black and red maelstrom that radiated so much energy, he was sure even those in Kirigakura could feel it. Naruko, spotting him, laughed with excitement and said, "Take this, you misguided opponent." With a fierce roar, Naruko poured more of her ki into the maelstrom, making it grow in both size and power. "Draconic Maelstrom!" she cried. The attack formed into the head of a massive dragon, charging straight for Zabuza, who stood frozen in fear. The attack hit Zabuza head-on, and the demon of the mist cried out in pain. When the attack subsided, Zabuza crashed to the ground, mere feet away from Team 7 and Tazuna. Kushina, staring in awe, couldn't help but think how she stood no chance against Naruko, Shinjin, or Ashley if they were using their full power. Barely able to move, Zabuza whispered, "Haku." A figure appeared in a swirl of ice, grabbing Zabuza and vanishing with him just as quickly. Naruko landed gracefully and, sensing someone else's presence, scoffed, "That's right, run away." Tazuna, on his knees, couldn't stop thanking the heavens for what he had just witnessed. To him, what Naruko had just done seemed nothing short of divine. Naruko turned her gaze toward the area where Naruto was still locked in battle with Kisame and wondered aloud, "I wonder what's taking father so long?" Meanwhile, Naruto, locked in a blade clash with Kisame, could tell that Naruko had already finished her battle and perfected her draconic maelstrom. With a smile, She jumped back. Kisame, covered in cuts and gashes, smirked and asked, "Why the smile, kid?" Naruko chuckled with amusement. The demon of the bloody mist was defeated. Kisame's eyes widened at the mention of Zabuza. Even he had to admit that Zabuza was a formidable fighter. Noticing Kisame's surprise, Naruko chuckled again and said, "Don't worry, soon enough, you'll be joining him." Kisame narrowed his eyes and asked, "What makes you so sure, kid?" Naruko smiled, lifting Excalibur high into the air. "Because I'm done playing with you." Hearing this, Kisame's eyes widened with hope that Naruko was bluffing. Naruko grinned, "Witness my power." Closing her eyes, she spoke the words, "Centuries have passed since one has revealed herself. Many have tried to rise, but only one can truly create. Declare thy king, O blade of legend. Ascend Excalibur." A massive explosion of energy shook the world, darkening the sky over the entire elemental nations. Kisame, barely able to hold on to Seimata, watched as the smoke began to clear. Naruko now hovered in the air, a crown resting on her head, connected to a skull mask covering her eyes and nose. As armor materialized around her, Kisame could feel the immense power radiating from her. With her new armor now in place, Naruko touched down on the ground, looking at Kisame with calm determination. "Behold the initial release of my blade, Excalibur," she said. "Not done yet." Naruko's grin widened. "But I'm not finished." With a clenched fist, she tapped into the death force. Another explosion of energy erupted, and this time, a chilling aura of dread and impending doom enveloped the entire world. Ashley, sensing the change, commented, "Father is tapping into the death force." As the smoke cleared once more, Kisame's fear intensified. Naruko stood before him, her appearance now more terrifying. Her black hair had turned a striking silver, with several skulls woven into it. But it wasn't her appearance that struck fear into Kisame, it was the cold, golden eyes staring at him with absolute indifference. Naruko smiled with confidence. "Behold the face of your doom, Kisame Hoshigaki." With a demented laugh, Naruko added, "Mother has already signed your fate, and Aunt has given me the go-ahead to rid the world of your presence." Drawing on her overwhelming aura, she declared, "Fear me, monster of the hidden mist, for I have become the embodiment of fate." Naruko roared, and Kisame found himself soaring through the trees, his body aching with each impact. When he finally stopped crashing through the branches, he was back at the point where the battle had begun. Coughing and struggling to his feet, Kisame was met with Ashley's smirk. "Oh, father is about to defeat you," she said confidently. Kisame, turning to her, gave a defiant gesture and said, "I'm not going down that easily." His words were interrupted by the deep, commanding voice of Naruko. "Yes, you are," she declared. Kisame quickly reacted, swinging Seimata in an attempt to defend himself, but he was stunned when Naruko effortlessly knocked the weapon aside. Naruko punched Kisame in the stomach, sending him into the air, and then kneeled him in the face, causing Seimata to fall from his grasp. Naruko then delivered a powerful punch to Kisame's chest, causing a distinct cracking sound as he made contact. Kicking Kisame, she watched as the man rolled towards the wide-eyed Sakura. Naruko calmly walked toward the fallen blue-skinned man, her right hand charging with energy. Kisame struggled to get on his knees, feeling the weight of impending defeat. Naruko stopped right in front of him and, instead of launching her energy attack, crushed the ball of energy in her hand. Grabbing Kisame by the throat, she spoke with an intense tone. "Congratulations, Kisame. You will be the example for the vile Gato and the first of many to fall before the might of the Scions." She then threw Kisame high into the air. With determination, Naruko poured an immense amount of energy into her body, focusing it into her arms. Ashley, recognizing what Naruko was preparing, gasped. "Kushina-san?" she asked. Kushina, noticing the charge of energy, nodded and said, "Yes." Ashley, still looking at her father, grinned. "Remember how I told you that the Galaxy Breaker is one of my father's most powerful attacks?" Kushina, her eyes widening, replied, "Yes, why?" Ashley, licking her lips in excitement, said, "Father is about to show us something even more powerful right here, right now." Kushina wasn't the only one left in awe. As Naruko's energy reached its peak, she called out, "Behold the might of the Scions. Dark Radiance Blackbuster Cannon." With that, Naruko fired a massive ball of pure black ki from her arms and hands. The ball collided with Kisame mid-air, resulting in an enormous explosion. Far away in his hideout, Gato felt the earth tremble beneath him. He turned and, to his shock, saw a massive black mushroom cloud rising into the sky, its shape shifting into the form of a roaring ape pounding its chest, a symbol of the Scion's immense power. The shockwave from the explosion reached as far as Konoha, where it shattered windows and caused buildings to collapse. In his office, Sarutobi paused his work and gazed out the window, his eyes widening as he barely caught a glimpse of the fading mushroom cloud. Jiraiya, standing beside him, turned to see the same thing, his expression filled with disbelief. Danzo, his face grim, murmured, "The Jinchuriki." Sarutobi groaned, "This is madness." Jiraiya shook his head in awe. "The power she wields. It's incomprehensible." Meanwhile, Yugao, watching over Konohamaru, Moigi, Udan, and Tora, turned her head in the direction of the distant explosion. Konohamaru, sensing the immense power of his boss, said, "Boss just finished using the Dark Radiance Blackbuster Cannon." Yugao, confused, asked, "The what?" Konohamaru, his gaze fixed on the cloud, replied, "It's one of the boss's most powerful techniques. It's designed to end conflicts in a single blow. I wouldn't be surprised if she put enough energy into it to take down a tailed beast." Udan nodded, adding, "Oniai-sama needs to assert her power as the princess of all Scions." Moigi, gently petting the tired Tora, said, "Oniai-sama probably said something dramatic like, 'Behold the might of the Scions,' or, 'This is the fate of all who challenge the Scions.'" Tora, meowing in agreement, caught everyone's attention. Konohamaru, smiling, said, "Tora-chan is right. Knowing boss, she probably said the first one while turning her back, her tail wrapped around her waist." Yugao blinked in surprise. "You can understand Tora?" Konohamaru nodded and said, "We all can. Talking to and understanding animals is one of the first things boss taught us." Yugao, hearing this, asked, "Since you three seem to know so much about Naruko-chan, can you tell me what she finds attractive in a woman?" Konohamaru blinked several times and said, "She has to be strong." Moigi said, "She needs to give her a prime example of her power." Udan, pushing up his glasses, said, "She needs to be pretty as well." Yugao, hearing this, remembered what the kids had said and asked, "What else?" All three kids shrugged and said, "That's all we know. If you want to know more, ask Ino or Ashley." Yugao nodded and asked, "Shouldn't you guys get back to training Tora?" Konohamaru nodded and said, "She's right." Naruko, letting go of the intense energy flowing through her, felt Excalibur return to her regular blade form. Sheathing it, Naruko ran a hand through her hair and said, "Finally mastered and perfected that technique." Ashley, nodding to the gaping Kushina, watched as the shield dropped. Walking over to her father, she asked, "Was that really necessary?" Naruko chuckled and said, "Of course. The slime surely saw the explosion and knows that someone very powerful is coming for him." Ashley smirked and said, "Now he's going to be terrified and will try to run." Naruko nodded and said, "Exactly, and when he does run like the coward he is, we'll be ready for him." Ashley, laughing, placed Kubikirabocho on her shoulder and said, "Look, I have a sword now." Naruko looked at Kubikirabocho and then spotted Seimata laying on the ground. Using her tail, she wrapped it around the handle and brought it forward. Grabbing Ashley's other hand, she placed the handle of Seimata in it and said, "No, now you have two swords." Ashley, blinking, asked, "Why?" Naruko chuckled and said, "We both know that Excalibur is no ordinary sword, and if I really needed to, I could transform her into about 30 swords, give or take a few. So I want you to be trained to use 2 swords, in case one of them needs repair or someone disarms you." Ashley nodded in understanding. Both scions blinked when Tazuna bowed low to them and said, "O great and powerful Lord and Lady Shinjin, I am not worthy." Both scions raised an eyebrow and said, "No, you're not, but we will humor you." Tazuna started crying tears of joy, and Kushina, shaking her shock away, knew without a doubt that the two had gone easy on her and Kakashi. The man nodded, confirming his decision to remain the idiot sensei, as what he had just witnessed proved that Naruko and Ashley were powerful enough to end his life without a second thought. Sakura, now rethinking everything she had ever been told or thought about Naruko and Ashley, realized their immense power. They clearly didn't like her, and she knew she would be in serious danger if she ever got in their way. Swearing to never do anything so foolish, she shivered. Sasuke, now filled with jealousy, marched up to both scions and said, "Naruko, I demand you give me your sword and your power. Only someone like me can use them properly." Naruko and Ashley, both giving the boy deadpan looks, said, "Go away, idiot." Sasuke snarled and tried to grab the two, but was immediately struck by a double tail slap, sending him crashing into the nearest tree. Once again knocked unconscious, this time with a concussion and a broken jaw from the tails, Naruko shook her head and said, "The idiot will never learn." Ashley said, "Stupidity is a disease he can't cure." Naruko, looking at Kakashi, said, "Idiot sensei, carry the Uchiha. We're moving out." Kakashi nodded and said, "You got it." He then walked over and picked up Sasuke. Ashley, raising an eyebrow, said, "It seems Idiot Sensei has finally realized his place." Naruko snorted and said, "About time." She then turned around and began walking, with the rest of the group following behind her. Dear YouTube family, this is all for now. I hope you enjoyed this final part of the fanfic series. It's been an amazing journey sharing these stories with all of you. Your support means the world to me, and I couldn't have done it without each one of you. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for more exciting content. Thank you for being a part of this adventure. Warm regards. Anime Dreams.